Welcome to Behavioral Groups, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We talk with researchers and other interesting people to unlock the mysteries of our behavior by using a behavioral science lens.
Okay, Tim, what if that behavior is for our future self? Do we unlock those mysteries as well?
Of course we do. I mean, we're here to unlock the mysteries of all behavior, big, small, present, future. You know, we're mystery unlockers, basically.
Well, that's good, since my future self is going to need a lot of help given all the trouble that my past and current self are getting it into.
Well, my time-traveled friend, you are in luck because this week's guest is Hal Hershfield, who has over a decade of groundbreaking research looking into how we view our future selves and has curated that research into this great new book called Your Future Self: How to Make Tomorrow Better Today.
Hal is a professor of marketing, behavioral decision-making, and psychology at UCLA's Anderson School of Management and holds the UCLA Anderson Board of Advisors term chair in management. His research, which sits at the intersection of psychology and economics, examines the way that we can improve our long-term decision-making.
Our future selves definitely need his help.
Oh, we do. Oh, yes. Yes, we do.
You know, one of the interesting pieces that Hal talks about is that we often see our future self as some kind of stranger. And that, you know, this ends up leading to sorts of problems and potentially detrimental behavior for how we act and make our decisions today, like for our present selves.
Yeah. And we talked with Hal about an idea, and we will discuss this in our grooving session as well. It's the idea that our future self isn't who we are today. And that concept can either be very liberating or very scary.
Okay, let's not scare the listeners away just yet.
Scary.
Just
our future selves are not us. Oh my God. No. Okay, so our future selves will be scared though when we discuss this with Hal. Maybe not. I don't know.
Okay, well we'll see. I suppose we should just kind of get into the conversation with Hal.
Yeah, because we're really screwing up our future selves with this conversation as we're doing. All right, so groovers, please sit back with a tall, frothy pour of your future self and enjoy our conversation with Hal Hershfield.
Hal Hershfield, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
We're excited as well. And we've got to find out, first and foremost, do you prefer coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee.
Instantly.
Not a doubt
there.
Wow.
It's not that I don't have tea, but coffee.
Coffee.
Okay.
All right. This is a much more important question than the coffee or tea question.
That was pretty important, but go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Guster or the National?
Oh, the National now. The National.
Now. The sad dad.
Yeah, not 10 years ago though, right?
No. Or 20,
We'll talk about, we might talk about that later.
Yeah,
so there you go.
Sure.
Okay, so does seeing a rendering of what you'll look like in 20 or 30 years help you make better decisions today?
It certainly can. So, you know, this is something that my, collaborators and I have been exploring for years now. The idea is, can we get people to think more vividly and emotionally about their future selves? So we've played around with age progression technology, showing people what they would look like.
Yeah.
By the way, this has gotten so much better.
Has it?
Yeah. I mean, when I first
started... The technology.
When I first started doing this, I mean, we were working with a graphic artist and this and that. It was, my wife and I just came across some old files, and there was like a printout of my aged images from 12 or 13 years ago.
Is it like the ones in the book?
It's like those ones, but it's like a little bit more fine grained. And
okay.
There was one that was supposed to be me in my mid 50s, and my wife, I don't think she was thinking too much about it, but she was like, you look a lot older now than the projection had you looking.
Look like that, and you're not there yet. Nice. Okay.
Ouch. No, but the idea is, okay, that's something that can help make a possible abstract future self a little bit more concrete.
Yeah.
And we've shown that the exposure to these images can boost intentions to save And then we have a paper. It's been in the works for a long time, but it was with it was a field study in Mexico. And what we found there is that people who are banking customers exposed to these images were a little bit more likely. They were about 16% more likely to make a contribution to a retirement account. I'm always careful when I talk about this stuff because it's not a panacea. It's
right.
Not like all the problems in the world are solved if I just see myself older, And in fact, with Snapchat and FaceApp and all these things, anyone can do it, but it's got to be the right context. And I suspect, and this is something that we'll, maybe get into, but research down the line we'll look at is, who does this work better for and for whom is it more?
And when and all of those things. And I think we'll definitely want to explore that line of thinking, but we have one last speed round question.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a speed round. I didn't mean to go so long.
Notice this. It doesn't matter. Our speed rounds are never speedy. I think out of maybe 1 out of 10 is ever speedy, Tim. I don't know.
How about 1 out of 100?
We're never there. Anyway, okay. What is more accurate, your prediction of an event or someone else's experience of a similar event?
Yeah, what the research suggests is the someone else.
Yeah. And why is that? Why can't we just go ahead and just imagine this future event like as well as could be imagined?
We're just not that good at simulating the future. We do it, we make a million little, or not a million, but there's a number of mistakes that we make. Dan Gilbert, Tim Wilson, and others have really done a great job comprehensively documenting those type of mistakes. And so, but we think, I know I can predict the future better, my own future better than somebody else who's done the same thing,
Of course. It's my future, right? I should be in control of it. I know what I want to be. I know what I want to do. That's going to be the reality that it is. And actually, as what you're saying is the research, doesn't really point to that, right? So,
and we want to think we're so unique, but
get in line.
Yeah, exactly.
So the book is called Your Future Self, and I have to admit there was there's sort of a visceral reaction, like, why do we need a book about our future selves? Like, I already know my future self because it's me. Like, I know me, don't I? I mean, what's the problem with that logic?
That's funny that it's I really appreciate that visceral response, right? Because I think it really speaks to an interesting thing that happens that, if you ask people to think about who will they be over time and who were they, I think on the surface, we just say, I am me, like I am who I am. But when you stop and think about it, I think that can really get kind of confronted. Like, has your name changed at all? Have you moved? Or do you have different interests? Are your preferences the same? Have your values shifted? Your career? And all of a sudden, I'm not so sure that there's just, one you. And I think that can be almost existentially a little bit terrifying.
Yes.
Bring it on.
Tim loves the anything existential, so you can just you captured him there. One of the things that you talk about in the book is the idea that our future self being different people altogether, that should be a comforting thought. And to that point, we just kind of go, well, for some people it might not feel that comforting. It may feel more terrifying that future person isn't the person who I am today. But why should that be comforting?
I find it comforting because I think it suggests that we can grow and change. And I think on some levels we hope for that and we know that. But if I sort of stop and say, well, I am who I am, I'm the same, logically speaking, that makes it a little bit harder to then, to truly grow and to truly change. And the idea that there can be different versions of me and there can be things that connect us together. It's not like I'm going to wake up tomorrow with no memories and none of my same values or any of that. But if there's some strands of connection, but I am different in some ways over time, I think it really presents the possibility that we can implement changes into our lives to make us more of the people we want to be.
Well, and see, that makes me think about, you wrote about Plutarch's great story of the ship of Theseus, and you talk about John Locke's philosophy as well. So, okay, I'm going to go on the philosophical side. By the way, first thing, cool, you're a marketing professor and you're talking about that shit in your class. I think that's fantastic. But is, to what degree do you sort of buy into Locke's approach about basically our memory is sort of the tether that kind of keeps our identity going?
I mean, it's a nice idea, that Locke.
He was a decent chap.
He thought some stuff.
Look, there's something to that, but of course, I think it becomes problematic when we start thinking about it more. The thinking, of course, is that what binds us over time is the memories that we hold. But I don't remember anything from before I was 5. And does that mean that that's just not me? I frankly could not tell you what I had for lunch 48 hours ago.
Yeah.
Is that guy just some other guy ate lunch? It's not, it just doesn't fit. And then, the other thing is that what happens when, in 10 years, myself in 10 years, I'm in my mid 50s, in 10 years, he can remember things that happen now when I'm in my mid 40s. And right now I can remember things that happened when I was in my mid 30s. But what if future me can't remember the mid 30s? That's a really weird conundrum there. And is there no connection between them? And so the memories idea, there's something to it, but it doesn't really fully bear out, I think, when pushed.
Well, and I think there's also this aspect of the research that we know on memories right now, right? It isn't just this picture that is constant and real. It gets reformatted, and that memory that we have might not actually be what really happened, and it gets mixed with others, and we kind of interpret different pieces of it, and all of the factors that come into memory. So is that memory of that I have that isn't actually what occurred? Am I now a different person because my memory is different from that person? So to your point, right. I think that line of reasoning is kind of has some faults in it, has some chasms that kind of you have to get over. So, which brings me to my next question, though, is there such a thing as true self, particularly as that self changes over time?
It is. I mean, could we have a full podcast series just on that question, right?
We like the small, little, easy to answer questions, Hal. Just those, yes, no things. That's what we go for.
Does a drink come with this question? I think this is obviously something that's been debated, and in the book, one of the things that I really sort of talk about and an idea that I subscribe to comes from the research of Nina Strominger, who I think is just an incredibly creative researcher. She and her collaborators, Sean Nichols being her main one, talk about essential moral traits, the essential moral self, if you will. Now, this is all about thinking about what do I point to in others that makes me say that's their true self? And the thinking is that there are certain elements of the self that we can kind of boil down, the essence, if you will. Tim, you seem to guffaw. You must have a good sense of humor, and that's, if in 2 years we got in a call and you were morose and never laughed once, I might say,
what's wrong?
That's not Tim. Tim's changed. It's somehow the core of Tim is no longer there. And so, the thing I like about this general idea is that it suggests that there can be all these surface level changes. Tim, maybe you wake up and you decide to be Steve, but you still have that laugh, and, and I mean, honestly, Kurt, so the same thing could be said for you. And so it's those essential moral traits, I think maybe the closest we can get to, at least in pointing to others, or saying that's, I think, part of the true self there.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I find it really interesting in my own life. I have recently, in the last year, I changed jobs and moved across the country. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina now. I used to live in Minneapolis. I used to do 30 to 50 gigs a year as a musician, as a hobby. And I've only played once in Charlotte in the last 9 months. And when I talk to friends, they have this question: how could you not? How could you not be playing? How could you not be recording your next record? How, you are, an artist at heart. And it's really hard. It's been hard for me, actually. It's a bit of an existential crisis. Am I still me?
Yeah.
What happened to all that passion?
Yeah. It's really funny. I think that actually represents a little bit of a funny asymmetry where, sometimes the things we do can also be, especially from our own perspective, those can be thought of as that is me. And, I wonder if pushed, your friends might say, well, as long as he still finds the same jokes funny, he's still him, and maybe he's on a musical hiatus, but yeah.
Still trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, Tim, I just think you might have realized how good your music is, and you're just like, saving it up for the big release. So
if only I would ever, if someone maybe other than me would realize how great my songs are.
All right, so Hal, I want to talk a little bit more about the book. We kind of talked some big philosophical pieces on who we are and our self and future and present and all of that kind of stuff. But the second section of the book, you kind of talk about this idea of time traveling in our minds and different pieces of this. And you have 3 cleverly named time travel mistakes that we make. And I want to talk about, we miss our flights, we engage in poor trip planning, and we pack the wrong clothes. Can you summarize just for our listeners real quick a little bit about that and why those are mistakes and what do they do for, why are they mistakes?
Yeah. So, right. So we, start with this idea of time travel. It's not, of course, not real time travel. It's mental time travel. I think that's probably clear.
Good clarification.
Yeah. Look, I use these sort of analogies to help understand the types of mistakes that we make, these, quote unquote, time travel mistakes, which aren't just time travel mistakes. They bear out in like real, with real consequences, as I think we'll get into. But so basically, missing your flight, the thought there is that it's almost as if you're in the airport and you get a little early for your flight, and you go to the bar and you have a beer, and then before you know it, you're like 3 beers deep and you've missed your flight. Now, the funny thing about that is it's as if you've just completely failed to take your trip. Applied to mental time travel, it's like you get stuck in the present. You're anchored on the present, not even really thinking deeply about the future. Now, the sort of, next level is what I call poor trip planning. It's like I've thought about the future. I've planned my trip out. I'm going to go to Boston, but then I get there and I realize, oh my God, I've completely forgotten to make any plan. Like I take my trip, I get there, and is it a big deal? Not really. I don't know, but I have to spend like a decent chunk of my days planning my trip while I'm there. It's probably not that efficient use of a time. So in terms of our own mental time travel, the idea here is that I think about the future, but I don't do so in all that deep of a way. Procrastination, by the way, is a perfect example of this, where I say I will do that thing next week, like that's when I'm finally going to submit. I've got to do this like reimbursement for my son's preschool. It's like, that's when I'm going to submit that paperwork. Well, that's not really being that fair to my future self or thinking about that deeply, because I haven't done it for the last 3 or 4 months. Like I'm probably not going to do it next week, Now, the final one is I call it packing the wrong clothes. So now I'm planning for the future. I've sort of done the plans. I've like actually done something, right? It's, we used to live in Chicago. It was like, I remember we were in Chicago. We were going away. I forget where we were going, somewhere warm. And you're packing and I'm like, I know it's going to be warm there, but I can't help but notice that it's 19 degrees outside. It's really cold. So I better throw a couple sweaters in just in case,
The nights will get cold wherever we're going,
it could be
right?
chilly at night, a light sweater. Now, the funny thing there is that I find this one to be really quite pernicious, because I convince myself that I'm thinking deeply about the future. But in doing so, what I'm actually doing is using my present day emotions and feelings and unfairly projecting them ahead onto a future self who may change and may have different preferences from me. And that's really not that fair to him either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so how do we get around that?
Yeah. This is
again, super easy questions.
Super easy questions.
No hard ones here. We're making it easy.
Well, look, for that last one, the packing the wrong clothes. I'm sure we'll talk about some of the solutions, that the research has suggested. Honestly, to me, one of the big things there is the recognition that our preferences do change. I don't think that still solves the problem, but one of the issues that arises is when we forget that things will change and we make these plans and then somehow are surprised that things have changed. When I was working on that section of the book, I talked to a palliative care doctor, BJ Miller, who is just, I don't know how to say this, and this isn't meant to sound dark, but like if I were to have to be at the end of my life, he would be the one I'd want to have.
That's cool.
Taken care of me. And I had asked him, when do when do end of life plans go wrong? And, he said, it's not when people don't plan. It's when they plan and then they're somehow surprised that things change.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit, this isn't what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And he said, that they go right when people have a mature view of time, is the way that he put it to me. And I love that idea. Basically, I can plan, but I also have to recognize that things change as the years tick by, as the decades go on, and then update those plans and move with them. And I thought that was such an interesting antidote to projection bias, which is what researchers call it, the packing the wrong clothes, the sort of analogy that I came up with. But anyway, it's a lot.
I think that's really fascinating to think about that. This idea that goes back to, again, it's like, all right, so you land in Florida after packing a suitcase full of sweaters, and okay, so do I suffer through that, or do I go out and buy some t-shirts? And I might have to change my plans that were, I thought were laid really well back in Chicago, but now they're not, right? And so...
But Kurt, I think that is such a great, great point, because who hasn't had that experience where you get on a trip and you realize you forgot to pack something and you're like, yeah, I guess I'm just screwed. And it's like,
well, I'm not brushing my teeth for 2 weeks.
It's like, hope no one's that close to me. But, or you go out and get that thing. I mean, we're not talking about, like, I get it. There's big things. I don't want to spend all that money, but like, we could change.
I mean, and I think that it's a nice analogy, and it kind of works. And going back to the procrastination part that you talked about, and you mentioned Tim Urban in your book as well.
Yeah,
and I think he has the best little, things about, Thursday, Tim will do this, but then Thursday, Tim comes and goes, oh, well, no, Friday, Tim will do this. And you just keep kicking that thing down the road. Because why is Friday, Tim more likely to do it than Thursday, Tim versus Saturday, Tim versus,
Right.
And it's interesting because it does kind of point to the fact that at some point, one of the Tims is going to have to do it if it's ever going to get done. But
well, it's a wonderful trick we play on ourselves too, thinking that somehow future versions of me will be stronger, better, more efficient, more likely to take care of the stuff I've got piling up. Like that guy definitely will hit my email inbox, but
well, Jerry Seinfeld did the nighttime guy, morning guy thing. Like that was just perfect.
It's so good. It's so good.
When we were in our prep discussion, we were talking about different things that we thought were important in the book. And Mary, our producer, brought up the letter to yourself, to your future self.
Yeah.
She wrote a letter to her future self when she was 15. Yeah, so Mary actually wrote a letter to her future self when she was 15 and then opened it when she was 25 and, had kind of a profound response to it. Do you think it's a good tool? Is it a tool that's underutilized? And what could we get from doing something like that?
That is so cool that she did that. Because I interviewed Ann Napolitano, a author in writing the book, who since sort of, when I interviewed her, she had already had some best-selling books out there, but then her most recent book got picked by the Oprah Book Club, and she's like blown up.
Wow.
HBO just remade, so I thought, wow, I'm glad I got to her when I did. But she did this too. When she was 14, she wrote a letter to herself at 24. And every 10 years, she opens the past one and writes a new one. And when I talked to her about it, it was so interesting because she had said, oh my God, some of the early letters are so sad. Like the amount of attention she put onto other people's feelings, and like these sort of like, societally driven milestone markers. And she said, I had all these things that I wanted to have happen by the time I was in my 30s. And none of those happened. And I was still qualitatively happier then than I was when I was in my mid-20s, And
wow.
And now there's a couple of insights here. So what the research suggests, I've actually, I've done some work where you've had people write letters to their future selves.
Mm-hmm.
There's a newer technique that it seems like it works better, which is having people write a letter to their future self and write one back from their future self to their present self. I briefly mentioned this in the book. Now, what's really interesting is the story from Ann Napolitano and from your producer Mary. There's another element there, which is not only writing the letter, but then essentially being around to get the old letter, then that's different than writing one back from your future self. You're now having like almost a conversation through time. And there's other work that tangentially is examined what happens when we open up time capsules, if you will.
Yeah.
You can sort of imagine what we're talking about when we say time capsule. One of the surprising findings is that the act of opening up a time capsule, even from 2 months ago, 3 months ago, it calls to mind ordinary experiences that we might have otherwise forgotten. And it turns out that those really add up to well-being. And we don't have a hard time thinking that we'll look back on extraordinary experiences. Like I never for 1 minute at my wedding thought I'll never remember this day.
Never.
Nope. All those pictures I won't ever look at. None of this.
Never look at them again.
Yeah.
But the little things, and I mean, I think this is especially true. I have little kids at home. There's like these little moments, and it's like those are the things that now that I'm familiar with this research, I say, I've got to remember those things because those are going to just disappear. And I've got to remember those ones. Those are the ordinary experiences. And it's like, I think that's part of what that sort of writing a letter to and then getting one back from your past self. I think that's part of what's doing. Yeah.
I love that. And so I'm a journaler. I've been journaling for a long time. And I usually write in a small little black journal that I write every day. But for a while, I was doing it online on an online system that I just type in. And what's fascinating for me is that the black ones I look at maybe once a year and kind of look back, but I don't do it all that often and refer back. The online one just sends me like 3 years ago, you wrote this and just a random piece. Cool. And so all of a sudden you're brought back into 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago into that, everyday moment. Oh, I took, my son to soccer practice tonight and he scored a goal. But all of those kind of things and it's really a different experience that was, I found because you're being kind of pushed into that moment and you're not necessarily searching for it. And I don't know if but when you were talking about that, I don't know if there's a question in there, but it just reminded me of that piece.
No, this is more of a comment than a question, but and I think you're absolutely right. And I bet, of course there's Time Hop and there's, even like Apple Photos, they do this sort of thing. And but I love the idea of the sort of journaling. And what's nice about that is there's an automatic component that pushes those past entries to you. That's great. It's just great. I love it.
Well, Hal, let's talk about some of the observations that you've made with all of your own research and the tremendous amount of research that you cite in the book. What are things that we can do today to make tomorrow better for us?
Well, the first thing is you got to buy the book.
Of course.
I'll right there, double down on that.
Actually, wouldn't your tomorrow be better if you bought 2 books?
Yeah, it makes a great gift. No, so, I break it down to 3 categories. This is the way that I've been thinking about it. The first category is to really try to bring the future in closer. Make that future, we talked briefly about making it more vivid, making it more emotional, drawing future you into present you. One way is the age progressed images. One way is a sort of letter writing conversation. And I think, there's other methods too. Actually, one that I think is really clever is to think about an expanse of time in terms of days rather than years. There's a really fascinating study that found that, if you, by Daphne Oyserman and Neil Lewis, if I think about retirement as if it's happening in 30 years, compared to if I think about retirement as if it's happening in 10,950 days, the day framing makes it feel like it's happening sooner, which is funny because it's a bigger number, but we know days tick by. It's like, wow, I didn't realize it was in days. Now that's just, that may be sort of like a messaging type of intervention, but I like it because it really kind of changes that connection to future selves. So another bucket is to try to, start with the recognition that there's this like me now. This is the guy who's like planning. I want things to go a certain way. And then there's a future me. I want that guy to look back and say, you did it. I did it. And then there's the guy in the middle, the eventual present me who's going to screw things up. And this is the guy who, it's like whether it's snacking or exercising or, saying I'm not going to buy another drink tonight. And then after a drink or two, it's like, come on, what the hell,
Never happened to me.
Yeah, never. I know, this is a foreign experience, I can tell you.
Totally. But theoretically speaking, yes.
Theoretically speaking, one can imagine, and there, commitment devices and pre-commitments really are so useful. And I know other researchers have, of course, talked about those, many of whom have been on your show. One of the things that I think is really important about commitment devices is to think about them through the lens of present and future selves. Because the thing about commitment devices is that they are incredibly effective. In the book, I spotlight antabuse, which is a pill one takes, if you're suffering from alcoholism. And what it does is essentially make it so that if you have a drink, you skip over all of the great parts and go right to the hangover, like a epic hangover.
Yeah.
It's been called one of the most, effective treatments of alcoholism. And yet very few people take it up. And you think there's other forms of commitment devices like this that are really effective, but it's almost as if the punishments are so draconian, so harsh that I'm not going to do it. And so I think one of the real, tightrope balance, the balancing acts to consider here is, how do I pick a commitment device that has a punishment that's strong enough to deter a certain behavior, but not so strong that I don't sign up for this commitment device to begin with, and really balancing that out. And then, the third bucket of strategies and, making tomorrow better today is to also try to make today easier. So all of these things that we've been talking about and, all of these sort of decisions that involve these trade-offs in time, quote unquote trade-offs, thought about in the wrong way, it's always me now who has to make the sacrifice. And it's always, future me who gets the benefit. It's like, if I want to save money, I'm the one that can't spend it. That guy can get, a fatter bank account. If it's, I want to be healthier in 5 years, like, okay, it's like me tonight that can't eat the steak and the chocolate cake, but, that guy has better cholesterol. It's like a bad relationship where you're always the one. You're always sacrificing, And so how can we try to make the quote unquote sacrifices feel psychologically easier to undertake so that we do them? And so that it doesn't feel so painful, because some of these things, what's funny about some of these things is that it's not a trade-off, right? Like there are instances where exercising isn't just about, pain now. It's like, it actually is good now. It can be good.
Yeah, right.
And I talk about a lot of these other examples in the book, but I think, one, actually, I'll just say one that I really love. You can kind of fit into different buckets, but it's from Janet Schwartz, who's a behavioral researcher. And she had this insight that it was when she went to Coney Island to get she was with some friends, she went to go get a hot dog and fries. Of course, what else are you going to do, right?
What else are you going to do? Yeah.
But she went right after they started doing the calorie labeling on on the menu. And she was shocked to find that the fries, I think it was like 1,100 calories for the side of fries, And so she and her friend said, let's split them. Okay, we're going to each get a hot dog and we'll split the fries. So she had this insight, which is, if I'm going to try to cut back, I have a goal of cutting back my calories. I could make it sacrificial and painful and cut back on the thing I love. Who's going to get a third of a hot dog, right?
Yeah.
Or is there some way I could cut back on the periphery to still achieve the same goal? She actually worked with a restaurant and one of these like sort of fast food restaurants. It's kind of like a Panda Express type of place. And they offered people the option to get half the side, so you get your orange chicken, the reason you came there, but now you get half a side of fried rice. Well, if you have a goal of cutting back on calories, you could cut back on the main thing. That kind of sucks. I mean, that's why you went there.
That is a fantastic frame. It really is.
And, and I think that's a way of making the present a little easier. I mean, it's also a commitment device of sorts. Some of these things, they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. Well, Dan Pink, you got a nice quote from him on the cover of your book. Congratulations on that. Great guy.
Thanks.
But his last book was on regret. So how does looking back on regrets play a part in kind of looking forward to the future? Does it, or is there?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I mean, he's sort of hard to match, right? And his, he's such a way of like really boiling down an insight. And I remember one of the things that he talked about in the book, he has a really powerful anecdote I found it really relatable and powerful of a mom, a woman who, she was driving her kid around. The kid, I think it was something like spilled a milkshake, whatever it was. The kid spilled something. Mom immediately, got frustrated, lashed out, and quickly felt bad about it. And it was one of these things where I think years later, she still thinks about that moment. Yeah. And I've had, I think probably many of us have had a moment like that, parent or not, where we've snapped at somebody, done something, we say, I wish I hadn't done that. What's so interesting about that example is, at least in that particular story, she hasn't done it again.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I think there's versions, there's things I've done parenting, I say, oh man, and I still do it. But, I think the link there is regret, can be, this book is called The Power of Regret. It's a powerful force to change future behavior, because we can look back and say, I don't want that to happen again. But I think it has to go deeper than that. It's not that I just don't want it to happen again. What were the triggers? What were the things that happened that led to that? And how can I figure out how to change my environment or change whatever my response is, and so on, so I don't do that again.
Yeah. It's a friend of mine just told me this quote. He said, and I don't know if he stole this from somebody, so if he did, please let me know. But it was, experience. We don't learn from experience; we learn from reflecting on experience. And so,
that's great.
It's kind of the same thing that you're talking about with I can regret snapping at my kids, but unless I reflect on that and think about what are the triggers, what are the spots that made me do this, all of those factors. I'm probably likely, if I get in that same situation, I might be a little more hesitant, but I'm probably going to still happen unless I actually go through the work to think through that and do that. So I think it's a great insight as you're going forward. So,
Kurt, I'll add one thing to that, which is, the literature on procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, I think really interesting sort of strands of research there is on self-forgiveness.
Mm.
And, the idea is, if I'm looking back and I'm not doing, what if I'm procrastinating on something because I feel bad about it? I feel bad about the fact that I haven't done it. I feel bad that it's one of the reasons we procrastinate is because it's calling to mind all these negative feelings. Well, one way around that is to forgive past me for not have taken care of the thing. But importantly, it can't be a surface level forgiveness. It's like any relationship. If I were to get into a fight with my spouse and I say, it's fine, but it's not really fine.
Then it's not done.
It's not done. I mean, we all know this. Yeah. And the same thing is true for ourselves. If I say, whatever, it's fine that I didn't do that. Well, if I'm not really being genuine there, it's not going to.
Yeah.
And again, for our listeners, buy the book because you give some really good stories about that procrastination and the feeling of guilt and like the dishes piling up and all the other pieces. So some fun stuff with
very real
in the book. Yeah, that I'm like going, oh, I remember that. I did that.
Did you have to forgive yourself for being such a big Guster fan and becoming a fan of the National?
oh man, it's funny that you say that. I still have conversations with my roommate from
college.
Yeah, junior year of college. The closest he and I ever got into an actual fight was him saying, if you play that album one more time. I mean, this is when we had CDs. I think, if you play that CD one more time, I'm going to physically
end that piece of polycarbonate right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so your musical tastes have changed. Is there any forecast for what your future musical taste might be like?
It's such an interesting question, because as soon as you start engaging in this exercise, the forecasting exercise, you realize how little we don't know, right? And it's also, it's funny because I think a lot of times when we make some sort of future forecast or prediction, we mistakenly think, oh, there has to be so much change. Like if you ask people to draw what the cars will look like on the street in 20 years, they think they're all different. Well, there's lots of cars on the street right now, on the road right now that are 20, 30 years old because car fleets don't just turn over that fast.
Right.
I bet you I will still be playing, the National a lot, but I'm sure there'll be someone else. I can't tell you who, but it's like, look, have I completely stopped? I mean, this is really embarrassing, but have I completely stopped with Guster? Like, no, and it's like, and I'll tell you, when I got to college, I was in like a deep, deep Cat Stevens phase. I'm sounding like I'm very, I don't know what generation I'm being put into right now, but, I put him on for my kids and they love him. And, it's like really fun because I kind of revisit back to that. And, so will it completely change? I doubt it. But I bet the sort of portfolio will.
You won't be having the National on repeat, 24/7. You might have them now, but they might
Probably
be in the
not.
playlist. Yeah,
probably not. So, but I just went to see them 2 weeks ago. And,
you did, yeah.
And I it's hard to imagine that I won't be paying money for their tickets, but I bet I won't.
Good show. Did you enjoy it?
It was great. But I'll say. I've seen them probably 7, 8, maybe 9 times now. They're always great, but it's kind of funny because I can't. There's not a band I've seen that many times over a longer period of time. And the other night we were there and Matt Berninger's fantastic, and yet I said, "Oh, his voice sounds a little hoarse," and I realized. Well, yeah, he's been doing this for like a long time and he's in his 50s. And, the first time I saw him, he was in his 30s, late 30s. So it's a little different. Things change.
So this may be a bit of priming that we've been talking about these two bands. But if you found yourself on a desert island for a year alone and you could take 2 musical artist catalogs with you. So not one song or one record. You get the whole catalog. Which 2 artists would you take with you?
Oh my God, what a question. You got to think really deeply about this because it can't just be stuff that I like, but also like, God, if I listen to the National on repeat on a desert island, like that could be pretty... you could be really introspective, in a way that's not great.
They come to the nickname the Sad Dads.
Yeah, there's a reason there.
Pretty legitimately, yeah.
All right. I'm going to go with the Beatles for one because, the diversity. That's probably like the least informative answer because, the Beatles.
It works great. That's a great answer because you're right. Lots of variety.
Yeah, and then then I'm back and forth because it could be Belle and Sebastian because I feel like there's a lot of variety there too, and they're like also pretty happy. I could kind of like, but you want somebody with some variety there. I don't know, so I'll go with. Oh God, that I'm going to be up in the middle of the night and have come up with a better answer for this. But
we'll send it to us an email and we'll add it in. Oh,
Hal, this is not that level question.
Do you guys edit these? We'll go with the Beatles and Belle and Sebastian. How about that?
Okay, right. So you're not picking National. Even if you have the Beatles to kind of offset.
No, you're right. You're right. Now that I'm thinking about it, look, you know what? Let's swap out Belle and Sebastian, pop in the National because both bands. There's a big catalog, and there's a range of emotions there. Okay, great, Kurt. Thanks for talking me off my Belle and Sebastian.
I'm just saying, hey, you've already talked about how they're going to stay with you. You after the year on the desert island, you may never want to listen to them again. However, at that point, it might be good.
Hal Hershfield, thank you for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves today. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, it was so fun to talk to you guys. This is great.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Hal, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into not our today's brains. We are living in a future world, Tim, that we are that person. Who is that person? Who is that future me?
It is me, but it's not the me of today.
Whoa, that's deep, man.
Yeah. Man, this is so like, we could have like with Hal, we like needed another hour just to get into the philosophical implications of all this stuff. Oh man, it was so tempting.
So this is a piece that I want to get into, though, because this idea that our future self is a different person than us, and we know that at some level, I think, but thinking about it, and this is the piece that he said, is that because that future self is a different person, is that comforting or is it scary? What do you think?
For me, at this point in my life, it's comforting.
Oh.
It's actually really comforting for me right now. And I go back to Dan Gilbert's work on, studying 20-year-olds and 29-year-olds, and then 60-year-olds and 69-year-olds, and having those 9-year differences studied in the way that we think about, well, how well can we predict our future? And every 9 years increment, we're looking back and going, wow, there's a whole bunch of things that I had no idea was going to happen. And while I'm okay with I had no idea it was going to happen, life is unpredictable. What I'm comforted by is being able to just be okay with the idea that 9 years from now, I'm going to be different. Now, there's some things that I can do to orchestrate myself towards that, but there's a bunch of things that are just going to happen that are going to influence who I am. And that's okay. All of it's just okay, because it's still going to be me. It's just going to be a different me.
Which is the part that just still, to a degree, I agree with you that there's an element that is comforting, that we can change, we can grow, and that there's still an aspect of me that's in there. It's just not the me of today. Mm-hmm. But that's also, to a certain degree, scary, because I don't necessarily know who that future me is, and will today's me like that future me? I look back and think, the high school me, would that person like the me that I've become?
Yeah, right. I think that's a good question. And I can answer that for you. He wouldn't.
He goes, God, I thought you would have had a lot more hair, man. You are just God.
What happened to that mane that you had?
The thing that you used to like in my dreams when I still have hair and it gets in my eyes and I have to flick it out, and I don't have that anymore. No, but going back to this idea that I think there is a scary aspect of that, of, 10 years from now, 9 years from now, as you talked about that, is my political beliefs, are they going to be different? Is my belief about God and religion, is that going to be different? Is my who I hang out with, is that going to be different? Am I going to still, love my family the way I love my family, right? And to the degree I go, yeah, it's probably going to, those things are probably going to stay the same, but
they might not.
But they might not.
Yeah.
And
are you scared by it? What you were asking me? I mean, I right now I'm taking some solace in the idea that my future self is different from my current self. Are you comfortable with that? Happy with it? Excited about it? A little nervous about it?
Well, it's interesting, because how do we define ourselves, and how does that play into this? So I think there's a part of me that is comforted by it, this idea that we can grow, that we can change, that I'm not stuck with this version of me, that this version 5.6, of Kurt, right? I'm 56 years old, so I just went 5.6. Yeah.
I like that.
Is going to be version 6.0 sometime soon, and then 6.5, and then 7.0 and 7.5, et cetera. And those versions will be different. And there's a bit of that's comforting, but then there's that bit that says, will the present me, if I was to look at that future person and knew who that came to be, would I be going, oh yeah, that's a pretty cool guy? Or is that like an asshole,
Well, I've been reading a bunch of John Locke recently.
Oh,
the 18th century British philosopher.
One of all my friends, I can count on one finger who has recently been reading John Locke, and that would be you.
And just for the sake of, if there are any philosophers out there who really hate John Locke, I'm not a big fan of John Locke overall. Let's just put it that way. I have a lot of disagreements with his approach. But the one thing that I found really interesting is that when he talks about personal identity, he talks about it in terms of psychological continuity. And I think that there's something really interesting about this, that, 200 years ago, or however many years ago, he was kind of thinking about identity, or the self, as being something that was founded in consciousness and memory, not about the substance of the body or the soul. So he kind of looked at this idea of, you are what you think and what you can remember about yourself.
But that goes again, we had that conversation with Hal, right? This idea that, is it memory? Because we forget. I can't remember before I was 5. I can't remember what I ate last week. As he said, is our memory of who we were, does that define who we are today? I think there's an impact, but is that truly ourself? And then he goes in and he talks about, Nina Strominger, who, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name, but this idea of moral self, that there is an essential moral traits, this idea, as he mentioned, are you a happy-go-lucky person? Are you, whatever? And actually, going back to you, are you the guitar-playing Tim? Or have you changed? And as Hal asked, are you just on a musical hiatus, or are you a brand new non-musical Tim?
I have recently discovered, and recently as in like the past couple of weeks, recently rediscovered my musical self and feel more connected to that now than I have for the last 5 years, probably.
Oh.
And feel really deeply connected to it as a core part of who I am, as a really defining part internally of who I am. Even though I don't play out professionally, I've started writing again. I'm rehearsing more regularly, and it feels so good to be connected to that aspect of who I am. And I'll never make a living doing it,
right?
But that's not the musical me. The musical me is just the expression part of it. It's the writer, the player, the singer.
So going back to your teenage, young college age self, is that identity different than, were you going to make a living on this? Were you going to be self-identify as, I am a musician, and now you're identified as, I'm a behavioral scientist?
Totally different. And even, that my musical self identity when I was 13 or 17 or 23 is definitely different than it is today. It's dramatically different, and that's okay. I actually like that. I'm really happy with it. And this is part of what gives me comfort about thinking the future is going to be different. It doesn't mean that it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
It's just going to be different, and I'm going to find a way to make peace with it.
And I think there's an element of rosy retrospection in this as well. This idea that looking back, I'm going to say, well, there's a rosy kind of perspection on today, not retrospection, but a rosy look at who I am today. Well, I like who I am today, even if my 17-year-old self might not.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
I think there's something to be said for that, and there is some comfort in that. It is interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask you, you're doing a bunch of traveling. Mm-hmm. You're a big traveler. And Hal, I love the metaphors, like the missing your flight, poor trip planning, and packing the wrong clothes. I thought that those were lovely, actually.
Yeah.
But it's got to be on your mind. I mean, you're going to be on planes for the next
So I'm actually traveling to Norway and Denmark, leaving in about
today
under 12 hours. So getting on a flight with my family and going there. And it's really interesting because the packing the wrong clothes is something that's on my mind right now, just literally from this perspective, because it's 90 plus degrees here in Minneapolis today. And looking at the weather in Oslo, Norway, where we're going to land, it's in the 60s. Yeah. And yet I'm sitting here going, I need to pack a lot of t-shirts and shorts. And I'm like, wait, no, maybe I need to be thinking, but it's really hard for me to put myself in that, because right now I feel I have this like gleam, that shine that you get from the little, you're sweating a little bit and you're just feeling hot overall. And it's like, I can't pack a sweater. That's like, why would I pack a sweater? That's like, I can't even think about putting a sweater on right now. And I think there is a really interesting piece of that, right?
A correlation for you, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And so that correlation to, I can't even think about what that future self is going to be like. As we just talked about, I don't know. I don't know what the weather is going to be in the future. I don't know what I should be wearing.
Well, even if you do know what the weather is, you know what the weather is in Oslo. You know what that is.
Yeah.
And yet it's still hard to pack a sweater.
Yeah.
Because you're hot right now.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, this idea that we don't accept the fact that who we're going to be is different than who we are. And I think about this really from the perspective of that teenager that we talked about. I think about it from my teenage kids right now. Like, if I ask them, how much are you going to change over the next 10 years? They might say, I don't know. I think they'd, if I dug down into it, I think they would say, I'm not going to change that much at all. This is the things I like. And I'm sitting there going, oh, such foolish, naive kids. But then I attribute that to me too, because I'm looking forward and kind of,
And again, you actually know what the weather is going to be tomorrow, where you're going, and it's going to be different than today, and yet it's still hard to pack for it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really different from what it's like when we're children. There's always the, what are you going to be when you grow up kind of question. How does that get drowned out of us? Like, it's so easy for kids to imagine themselves being anything and being very different from what they are at that moment.
I mean, even in college, right? What's your career? What are you going to do? All those things. And we don't ask that, after the age of 25, maybe 30, those questions kind of disappear. Well, you're on that track. You're going to be this. You are an accountant. You are a behavioral scientist. You are a musician. You are a construction worker. Why? Why don't we continue to say, who are you going to be? And those are careers.
Right. That's just one
element of it. I think we even probably less so ask ourselves, who are we going to be from those other aspects of our life, even probably earlier. Those are like, once you're a teenager, I'm not going to be a different type. I'm not going to be a moody, goth person if I'm not that, or vice versa. Right. So
what about my faith journey? Am I, still going to be going to church, in 20 years? What's my relationship with my kids going to be like? Yeah. Am I going to have kids? I mean, I think that there's, not that we have to solve all these things, but I think it's worth giving them some consideration.
Yeah.
Just to, at the very least, prepare our hearts and our minds for the idea that in 5 years, life is going to be different.
So help me do this, Tim. Help me keep all the really good aspects of myself, and then change just all those bad aspects of myself. So my future self is the epitome, that perfect Kurt. Can you help me make sure that happens?
So I'll be your ass-kicking partner. How about that?
Okay. All right. So I think we've run this gamut. That wraps up this grooving session. And groovers, we hope that you learned something and that you will be able to start working today to make your tomorrow better with some of the aspects that we've talked about today.
You just say that so beautifully. You've always got this lovely epistle at the end of our grooving sessions that I just love. But,
I think you write most of them, so I just read what's on the script.
There was a lot of great information in this episode. And so help out your future self. That would be like for us as well.
Yeah, help out Tim and Kurt's future self. Bye.
Yeah. With giving us, we're giving us a little love. Wherever you listen to your podcast, just show us some love. Show us in Apple or Spotify or wherever else.
What does love look like, Tim? Is it like, an emoji?
It could be. Yeah. It could be a rating. It could be just like a quick 5-star rating. It could be a quick review. It could be, how about this? Like you could benefit your future self and our future selves by sharing this with someone that you think would enjoy behavioral grooves.
Oh, I love
Just
that.
tell them. Just use your words.
Or just, forward on in an email or a social media post. Hey guys, you should listen to this episode because it will help you become a better person in the future by learning stuff today. And not only was there great information in this episode, there's really some, I have to say, I really did love Hal's book.
Yeah, loved it.
We don't always love every book that we get from the authors on the show. We like them, but we don't love them. This one I really did love. So recommend that you go out and buy it and help your future self find their groove.